Well, brother, you may have noticed a detectable change in the weather in the past couple weeks, especially in the mornings as you go outside with cooler temperatures. At least in our area in the southern tier, lots of dense fog. And it is a sign that the holy days, in particular the Feast of Tabernacles, are coming quickly upon us. For the Lamberts, when I say the Lamberts, I mean for Papa Johnny, Grandma Hazel, and myself, this will be our 54th Feast of Tabernacles that we will celebrate. Our first Feast of Tabernacles was in 1969 in Jekyll Island, Georgia. And now we are 23 days away. And by this time, I'm sure you have started to put all your final feast plans into place, brethren. The purpose of this sermonette is to give you 5 points about attending the feast this year and to help you get in a Feast of Tabernacles state of mind. 5 points in a sermonette that violates every parameter known for a sermonette, so I'll ask for forgiveness later, and we got to get going on the road here. So why do we attend the Feast of Tabernacles, brethren? Why do we go to the feast? Well, first and foremost, we go to the feast because God commands us to go to the feast. And by the way, I forgot to mention greetings to the Williams who are online, as well as Linda, my wife, who is down in Atlanta watching the service this morning. So welcome to you and happy Sabbath as well. Brethren, God commands us to go to the feast, just like God commands us to be here on the weekly Sabbath. He also commands us to keep all of his annual holy days, including the Feast of Tabernacles. Turn in your Bibles to Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus chapter 23 and verse 33, we read the commandment here of attending the Feast of Tabernacles. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, the 15th day of the 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days to the Lord. And the first day will be Monday, October the 9th, I believe, will be the first day of that holy convocation." Verse 35, on the first day there shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work. Customary work is the job that you go to do on a daily basis. So no customary work is to be done. Mr. Bill Penman will not be fixing RVs on that day. I will not be fixing teeth on that day. And whatever your job is, you will not be performing your customary work on that day either. For 7 days you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. And on the 8th day you shall also have a holy convocation, and you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. It is a sacred assembly, and you shall do no customary work on it. As well as the 8th day, you shall not go to your job and do customary work. These are the feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, to offer an offering made by fire to the Lord, a burnt offering and a grain offering, a sacrifice and drink offerings, everything on its day. Obviously, now we don't do offerings anymore because they were done away when Christ was crucified. Now the word feast in verse 37, go back to verse 37, you'll see the word feast is translated from the Hebrew word moed, which means an appointment. So brethren, just as we have an appointment each weekly Sabbath day here as we come together to worship God, we also have 7 other annual appointments that we have that are called God's holy days, including the Feast of Tabernacles and the 8th day. As most of you know, I make my living as a dentist in the profession of dentistry, and the profession of dentistry revolves around appointments, just as our lives should revolve around the weekly appointment here on the weekly Sabbath, and also the annual appointments of God. We have a term in the dental profession for patients who fail to appear at their dental appointment. We call it a disappointment. And brethren, the last thing that we should ever want to do is to disappoint God. But if we're not attending the Feast of Tabernacles and we're not attending the eighth day, we are disappointing God. And just as the Ten Commandments are not 10 suggestions, attending the Feast of Tabernacles and the eighth day is a command, not a suggestion. Just as we cannot treat the Ten Commandments like an a la carte menu and choose which ones we want to obey, neither can we pick and choose which annual holy days that we want to attend either. Now, there is a disclaimer. The definition of a disclaimer is a statement or a document intended to limit responsibility or legal liability. And there is a reason why you don't have to attend the feast, and that's for serious health reasons. Serious health reasons. You are not expected to go to the feast if you are physically unable because of legitimate health reasons. And as you know, in this congregation here in Buffalo, the Williams have been fighting some very serious health problems for years. Gary Cook, usually Gary's in the front row. He's not here today, I would assume because he's just not able to make it, not only to weekly Sabbath services this week, but he's not going to be able to attend the Feast of Tabernacles either because of his serious health problems. However, brethren, God is mocked, and we cannot use minor health problems as a crutch or as an excuse to avoid attending the Feast of Tabernacles and the eighth day. Secondly, we need to leave our lives and our homes behind. We are instructed to leave our lives and our homes behind. We leave our personal homes and life behind, brethren, because it is a symbol of us coming out of this world and looking forward to God's future world to come. It's interesting to note that when we celebrate the spring holy days of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we picture coming out of Egypt, which pictures us coming out of the world. But also as we leave our homes in the fall to attend the Feast of Tabernacles, we are also picturing coming out of this world once again and the future that we have in God's kingdom. If you would turn to the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy in chapter 14. Deuteronomy 14 and verse 22. And this is the instruction that we have about saving a second tithe and then going up to keep the feast. Deuteronomy 14 and verse 22, you shall truly tithe. So a tithe is a tenth of your income that you are to save all year long. You shall truly tithe all the increase of your grain that the field produces year by year. Now we don't produce, some people do in the church still own farms and that's the way they make their money, but most of us who are not retired go to work and we save a second tithe. And you shall eat before the Lord your God in the place where he chooses to make his name abide. The tithe of your grain and your new wine and your oil of the firstborn of your herds and your flocks, that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. But if the journey is too long for you so that you are not able to carry the tithe, or if the place where the Lord your God chooses to put his name is too far from you, when the Lord your God blessed you, then you should exchange it for money, take the money in your hand, and go to the place where the Lord your God chooses. Brethren, God has chosen in the United Church of God various feast sites throughout the world and placed his name on those sites for us to come to assemble to worship him. If you would, turn to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11, where it talks about the faithful, the faith chapter, Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 13. It says, these all died in the faith, not having received the promises, But having seen them afar off, and were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland, and truly if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. But now they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly country. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. Brethren, when we were baptized and we made a covenant with God, we committed to seeking first his kingdom of God and his righteousness. And part of that agreement that we made with God and Jesus Christ was that we would leave our homes annually for an 8-day period and picture that coming kingdom, that country that is to come, as well as the second resurrection. Thirdly, we are to dwell in temporary dwellings. So we go to feasts because God commands us. We leave our homes and our lives behind. Thirdly, we dwell in temporary dwellings. If you would, turn back to Leviticus chapter 23 once again. Leviticus chapter 3 and verse 39 this time. We'll pick up to where we left off before. Leviticus 23 and verse 39. Also on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered the fruit of the land, you shall keep the feast of the Lord again for 7 days. On the first day there should be a Sabbath rest, and on the 8th day a Sabbath rest. Verse number 40. And you shall take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of beautiful trees, branches of palm trees, the boughs of leafy trees, and the willows of the brook. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. You shall keep it as a feast to the Lord for 7 days in the year. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. You shall celebrate it in the 7th month. Verse 42, you shall dwell in booths. Booths are temporary dwellings made out of the vegetation that we just looked at. For 7 days, all who are native Israelites shall dwell in booths, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel dwell in booths. So brethren, obviously and thankfully, we don't have to go out and live in the woods and cut trees and cut boughs and cut branches and put sidewalls on that temporary dwelling with vegetation. Obviously, the Israelites had no motels, no hotels, no condominiums to temporarily dwell in. So God instructed them to build those temporary structures out of vegetation. However, in this day and age, when we leave our homes and we dwell in temporary dwellings, however nice or however meager that they may be, we are spiritually reminded that in whatever area we now live, our dwelling places on this earth are only temporary. Christ will return, brethren, and our dwelling place will be with him, our permanent home. We are also reminded that our physical bodies are only temporary. They last for just a while, and then we die. God gives us time in these physical, in these physical bodies to live God's way of life and to build the character that he requires for those who will receive permanent spiritual bodies upon the return of Christ. When we are in the millennial reign, brethren, of Christ, we will no longer be in these physical temporary bodies, but the permanent eternal bodies God has prepared for those who love and follow him. Fourthly, brethren, we are to stay at the Feast of Tabernacles for all 7 days and also for the 8th day of the feast, which pictures the second resurrection. Again, in Leviticus 23, in verse 39, we just read that we are to keep the feast for all 7 days. Unfortunately, some in the church have decided on their own that it is not enough to go to the feast. It is enough to go to the feast only on the first holy day and on the 8th day only, when there are holy convocations. Brethren, this is not enough. When we go to the feast, it pictures our lives in the kingdom of God. The society and age we live in will be gone. None of us should view God's kingdom as a place to which we go, but if we long for our old lives that we can go back to. The ancient Israelites, when God brought them out of Egypt, longed to go back. God was not pleased, and he is not pleased if we symbolically show him by our actions and attitudes that we are not committed to his kingdom, the reign of Christ, and to live his way forever and ever. When we make decisions, bear in mind that we are showing God our attitude towards the future and the future he has in mind for all of us. Again, brethren, there are some extenuating circumstances which may not allow us to go to the feast for all 7 days. I know in the first 2 years when I was attending dental school at the University of Buffalo, I was allowed 3 absences in a semester, or else I could have been kicked out of dental school. So for the first 2 years of dental school, I could only go to the feast on the first holy day, the Sabbath, and the 8th day. Of course, that's judgment is the weightier matter of the law, and there are exceptions, but these are very narrow exceptions, and that again, God's not mocked. I mean, he knows if we're playing games or not, and we should use those very rare instances as a solution or an excuse not to attend all 7 days of the feast, brethren. Lastly, number 5, go to the feast to be with God's people. Go to the feast to be with God's people. Micah chapter 4 and verse 2. Micah chapter 4 and verse 2. We read, "Many nations shall come and say, 'Come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion the law shall go forth, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem.'" Brethren, there are services every day at the feast as we go up to the mountain of the Lord and seek his teaching. We must be there at services every day if we are physically able to and we are not ill. There are feast activities scheduled as well. Make the feast activities your priority. Every feast site has nice attractions, but God did not appoint the feast as a vacation or time to revel in the world's attractions. It is primarily a time for his people to be together in one place and in one accord, growing together into what he wants us to become. Embrace the feast, take the time and make the time to put God and the feast first. And God has instructed us to spend up to 10% of our entire year's income in the span of approximately 1 week, brethren. So that can become a temptation for us to focus more on the physical things and not on the more important spiritual aspects of the feast. And we need to be on guard about that, brethren. Brethren, in conclusion, the Feast of Tabernacles and the 8th day are the apex of God's Holy Day plan and the culmination of God's plan for all of mankind. It should also be the highlight of our individual year, brethren. Hopefully most everyone here and on the webcast is planning to go and will be able to attend the feast this year. We know that there are some sick among us that legitimately cannot fulfill the command by God to attend the feast. However, if anyone is not going to the feast this year for any other reason besides health reasons, now is the time to begin to start planning to attend the feast next year in 2023. Every year, immediately following the feast, we begin planning for the next Feast of Tabernacles the following year by keeping second tithe, by looking at our work schedules and calendars to see what kind of personal time that we need to take off from our jobs. We have a holy day calendar that goes out 10 years, so we know exactly when the Feast of Tabernacles and the 8th day are to occur. So now with over a year until the next feast in 2023, we have plenty of time to plan for next year's feast if we are unable to go this year. Now, lest you think that I came up with this all on my own, I have to give credit where credit is due, and that's to the United Church of God president, Mr. Rick Shaby. He wrote this letter, which you can find in the e-news, and which I encourage you to read, pointing out these 5 points, and it would be good for you, after you hear this sermonette, to go back and read what he said. I put my own editorial comments as far as my experience of being in the church for 54, 55 years now, but I encourage you to also go and read it for yourself. Brethren, happy Feast of Tabernacles.